Part 1. The year was 2389, and the galaxy had never felt so vast or so mysterious. Humanity had reached farther than anyone thought possible, colonizing distant planets and exploring uncharted regions of space. Among the countless ships that ventured into the unknown, one stood out, the Odyssey's Edge. It wasn't the biggest or the fastest ship in Earth's fleet, but it carried a crew known for their determination and skill. Their leader, Captain Ryan Carter, was a man who inspired confidence. He had a steady hand and a sharp mind, qualities that made him well suited for the challenges of deep space exploration. On this particular mission, the Odyssey's Edge was sent to investigate an uncharted sector of the Andromeda Galaxy. The region was infamous for its strange gravitational anomalies and swirling clouds of cosmic dust. Scientists back on Earth had detected faint energy readings coming from the area, but no one could explain what they meant. For the crew of the Odyssey's Edge, it was just another day at work, until things took a turn they couldn't have anticipated. It started when Dr. Laura Bennett, the ship's xenobiologist, noticed something unusual on the sensors. She was bent over her console, her dark hair tied back in a loose ponytail, squinting at the data scrolling across the screen. "Captain," she said, looking up with a mix of curiosity and concern, "there's something out there. It's not natural." Ryan walked over to her station, his boots clicking softly against the metal floor. "What do you mean, not natural?" he asked, leaning in to get a better look at the readings. "It's hard to describe," Laura replied, pointing to a cluster of blinking dots on the display. "There's some kind of structure drifting through the debris field. It's emitting low-frequency pulses almost like a heartbeat. But it's not moving like a ship. It's stationary, as if it's been abandoned." Ryan frowned. Abandoned alien structures were rare but not unheard of. Still, they always carried an element of danger. Turning to Lieutenant Daniel Hayes, the ship's security officer, he gave a curt nod. "Daniel, assemble an away team. We're going to check it out." Within minutes, the team was ready. Laura insisted on joining them, eager to study whatever they might find. Daniel, ever cautious, double-checked his weapon and reminded everyone to stay alert. The rest of the crew watched from the bridge as the shuttle detached from the Odyssey's Edge and headed toward the mysterious object. As they approached, the structure came into view. It was massive, easily the size of a small moon, with jagged edges and surfaces that shimmered faintly under the dim light of a distant star. Parts of it looked ancient, covered in layers of cosmic dust, while other sections gleamed unnaturally, as though they were made of polished glass. Strange symbols were carved into the walls, glowing faintly with an eerie blue light. "This place gives me the creeps," muttered one of the engineers, breaking the tense silence. "Stay focused." Daniel snapped, though his grip on his weapon tightened slightly. He didn't like this either. The team landed near what appeared to be an entrance, a gaping hole in the side of the structure, large enough for the shuttle to fit through. Inside, the air was cold and stale, and the walls seemed to hum faintly, as if alive. Laura led the way, her scanner lighting up with readings she couldn't quite decipher. "This is incredible," she whispered, more to herself than to the others. "I've never seen anything like it." The deeper they went, the stranger the environment became. The glowing symbols grew brighter, pulsating in rhythm with the faint hum in the air. At one point, they passed a series of murals etched into the walls. Each depicted scenes of destruction, worlds consumed by fire, civilizations reduced to ash, and shadowy figures looming over terrified crowds. The images were unsettling, and even Laura paused to take them in. "This isn't just art," she murmured. "It's a warning." Before anyone could respond, they reached the heart of the structure. In the center of a vast chamber stood an object unlike anything they'd ever encountered. It was a crystalline orb about the size of a basketball, suspended in midair. Its surface shimmered with colors that shifted and danced, as though it were alive. A faint vibration emanated from it, resonating in their chests. Larva stepped closer, her scientific curiosity overriding her caution. "It's beautiful," she breathed, reaching out a hand. "No!" Daniel shouted, lunging forward to stop her. But it was too late. Her fingers brushed the surface of the orb, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deafening roar, the orb flared to life. Tendrils of dark energy shot out, wrapping around Larva before she could react. She screamed, collapsing to the ground as the energy surged through her body. "Fall back!" Ryan barked, grabbing Larva and dragging her away. The orb pulsed again, sending waves of energy rippling outward. The entire structure trembled, and the glowing symbols on the walls began to flicker wildly. "We need to get out of here now," Daniel yelled, firing his weapon at the tendrils of energy lashing out toward them. The team scrambled back to the shuttle, narrowly avoiding being caught by the growing chaos. Once aboard, they sealed the hatch and prepared for launch. Just as the engines roared to life, the orb let out one final pulse, a burst of energy so powerful it shook the entire structure. Outside, the debris field lit up like a supernova, and the shuttle was thrown off course. Through the viewport, they watched in horror as the orb's glow intensified, spreading outward like ripples in a pond. "What have we done?" Larva whispered, clutching her head. Her skin was pale, and her eyes darted around as if she were seeing things no one else could. Back aboard the Odyssey's edge, alarms blared as the ship's systems registered the shockwaves spreading across space. It moved faster than light, jumping from system to system via subspace communication relays. Within moments, reports began flooding in from nearby colonies and vessels, all describing strange phenomena. People were hearing voices, seeing visions, and succumbing to madness. Whatever had been unleashed inside that alien structure was now loose in the galaxy, spreading like a plague. Ryan stared at the viewscreen, his jaw clenched. They had stumbled into something far beyond their understanding, and now the entire galaxy was paying the price. Part 2. The Odyssey's edge was no longer a ship of exploration, but a vessel caught in the grip of chaos. The crew moved about like shadows, their faces pale and drawn. Strange things were happening, things they couldn't explain. At first, it was small, faint whispers echoing through the corridors, barely audible over the hum of the ship's systems. Then came the dreams. Vivid, horrifying visions that left the crew gasping awake in cold sweats. Shadowy figures with glowing eyes stalked them in the darkness, their voices hissing words no one could understand. Dr. Larva Bennett was among the worst affected. She hadn't spoken much since returning from the alien structure, her mind consumed by guilt and fear. She sat alone in the medical bay, staring blankly at the wall, her hands trembling as she clutched a cup of lukewarm tea. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the orb, the way it had pulsed with light, the way the tendrils of energy had wrapped around her. She felt dirty, as if something had crawled inside her and refused to leave. Lieutenant Daniel Hayes wasn't faring much better. A seasoned soldier who prided himself on his discipline, he found himself plagued by memories of his family, memories he had long buried. His wife and daughter, killed in a shuttle accident years ago, now haunted him at every turn. He would see them in the corners of his vision, smiling softly before vanishing into thin air. It was maddening, and no amount of logic could shake the feeling that they were real, just out of reach. Captain Ryan Carter tried to keep the crew focused, but even he wasn't immune to the growing unease. He woke in the middle of the night to find himself standing in the observation deck, though he didn't remember walking there. The stars outside seemed dimmer somehow, swallowed by an invisible void. When he turned around, he thought he saw someone standing in the doorway, a figure cloaked in shadow, but when he blinked, it was gone. The situation worsened with each passing hour. Reports flooded in from other ships and colonies across the galaxy. Entire populations were experiencing the same symptoms: hallucinations, paranoia, and uncontrollable fear. On one colony world, people had barricaded themselves indoors, refusing to come out even for food or water. On another, riots broke out as neighbors turned on each other, convinced they were being hunted by unseen monsters. Subspace communication channels were clogged with desperate pleas for help, but no one knew how to stop the spreading nightmare. Back on Earth, scientists scrambled to make sense of the phenomenon. They dubbed it the Veil, a name that sent shivers down everyone's spines. Early analysis suggested it wasn't just a physical force, it was psychic, feeding on fear and despair. The more people succumbed to its influence, the stronger it became. If left unchecked, it would consume entire civilizations, leaving nothing but empty worlds behind. Desperate for answers, Captain Carter contacted Earth Command, hoping for guidance. But even the brightest minds on Earth were powerless against this threat. "We've never seen anything like it," admitted Admiral Patricia Grant during a grainy video transmission. Her face was lined with worry, and dark circles hung under her eyes. "Whatever you encountered out there, it's beyond our understanding." Ryan clenched his fists, frustration boiling beneath his calm exterior. "There has to be something we can do," he said. "We can't just sit here while the galaxy falls apart." Admiral Grant hesitated, then leaned closer to the screen. "There is one person who might be able to help," she said quietly. "Ethan Cole." The name meant little to Ryan at first. Ethan Cole was a name whispered in scientific circles, often followed by phrases like unorthodox methods or dangerous experiments. Once a celebrated engineer, he had retreated from public life after a catastrophic failure left him scarred, both physically and emotionally. Now he lived alone on a remote outpost orbiting a dying star, cut off from the rest of humanity. Why would he help us? Ryan asked skeptically. "He's the only one who studied phenomena like this," Admiral Grant explained. "He calls it psychic resonance. If anyone can figure out how to stop the Veil, it's him." With few options left, Ryan agreed to reach out to Ethan. The message was sent via encrypted subspace relay, but hours passed without a response. Just when hope began to fade, a reply finally came: a single line of text. Asterisk, "I'll do what I can. Don't expect miracles." When Ethan arrived aboard the Odyssey's Edge asterisk, the tension was palpable. He stepped onto the bridge wearing a patched-up jacket and carrying a battered satchel filled with tools and notes. His face bore the marks of old burns, and his once bright eyes were clouded with exhaustion. Still, there was a sharpness to him, a determination that made Ryan wonder if maybe, just maybe, he really could help. The crew eyed Ethan warily as he introduced himself. Some muttered under their breath, questioning whether this man could truly make a difference. Dr. Larva Bennett, however, seemed intrigued. She approached him cautiously, holding out her hand. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. Ethan glanced at her hand but didn't take it. Instead, he nodded curtly. "Tell me everything," he said, his voice low and gravelly. For the next several hours, Ethan listened intently as the crew recounted their encounter with the alien structure and the subsequent spread of the Veil. He examined the data they had collected, occasionally scribbling notes in a worn notebook. When Larva described touching the orb, Ethan's expression darkened. "You shouldn't have done that," he said bluntly. "But you couldn't have known." His words stung, but Larva didn't argue. She simply nodded, her guilt evident. Finally, Ethan stood and addressed the group. "This isn't just some random artifact," he said. "It's part of something much bigger, an ancient consciousness designed to feed on fear. The orb was a fragment, a seed. By activating it, you unleashed its influence across the galaxy." Heavy silence fell over the room. Everyone knew what this meant. The nightmare wasn't going to stop on its own. But there's a way to fight it. Ethan continued. We need to find the source, the nexus where the veil originates. If we can disrupt its connection to the collective psychic network it uses to spread, we might be able to stop it. And how exactly do we do that? Daniel asked, crossing his arms. Ethan met his gaze evenly. By going straight into the heart of the storm. The idea was madness, but no one offered an alternative. Humanity's survival depended on stopping the veil, and Ethan was their only hope. As plans were made and preparations began, one thing became clear: the road ahead would be dangerous, and not everyone would make it back alive. Part 3. Ethan Cole wasn't the kind of man who inspired confidence. He was quiet, reserved, and carried himself with the weight of someone who had seen too much and trusted too little. Yet, as he stood in the center of the Odyssey's edge briefing room, surrounded by skeptical faces, there was an undeniable air of purpose about him. The crew didn't like him, how could they? But they needed him. And Ethan knew it. The plan was simple in theory, but nearly impossible in practice. They had to locate the source of the veil, a place Ethan referred to as the Nexus. According to his calculations, this was where the psychic energy feeding the veil converged, acting as both its heart and brain. If they could disrupt this Nexus, they might be able to sever the veil's connection to the galaxy-wide psychic network it used to spread. But getting there would mean traveling deeper into the black expanse, a region of space notorious for its gravitational anomalies and unpredictable conditions. It was dangerous territory, even for experienced crews. Captain Ryan Carter studied the star charts projected onto the wall, his brow furrowed. "This is suicide," he muttered under his breath. Turning to Ethan, he asked, "Are you sure this is the only way?" Ethan nodded without hesitation. "If we don't stop it at the source, it'll keep spreading until there's nothing left. You've seen what it's doing to people. Imagine that on a galactic scale." Ryan clenched his jaw but didn't argue. He glanced at Lieutenant Daniel Hayes, who was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. Daniel's expression was unreadable, though the tension in his shoulders suggested he wasn't happy about the mission either. "We'll need every advantage we can get," Ryan said finally. "What do you suggest?" Ethan reached into his satchel and pulled out a small device, a neural dampener. It looked crude, cobbled together from spare parts and wires, but it hummed faintly with power. "This will protect us from the veil's influence, at least temporarily," he explained. "It blocks psychic interference, creating a sort of mental shield. I designed it after my accident, but I've modified it to handle something on this scale." Lavra Bennett leaned forward, her eyes wide with interest. "How does it work?" she asked. "It generates a low-frequency pulse that interferes with psychic signals," Ethan replied. "Think of it like noise-canceling headphones for your mind. It won't stop everything, but it should give us enough clarity to focus." Daniel frowned. "And if it doesn't work?" "Then we're dead," Ethan said bluntly. There was no sugarcoating it, and everyone in the room knew it. Despite the grim outlook, preparations began immediately. The crew worked tirelessly to outfit the ship for the journey ahead. Engineers reinforced the hull, installed additional shielding, and modified the engines to withstand the extreme conditions of the black expanse. Meanwhile, Ethan fine-tuned the neural dampeners, ensuring they were ready for use. Each member of the away team would wear one, including Ethan himself. As the hours passed, the mood aboard the Odyssey's edge grew heavier. Conversations were sparse, and laughter was non-existent. Fear hung in the air like a thick fog, pressing down on everyone. Even routine tasks felt monumental, as if the weight of the galaxy rested on their shoulders. For many, sleep became impossible. Nightmares plagued them, growing more vivid and terrifying with each passing night. Lavra tried to distract herself by studying the data collected from the alien structure, hoping to find some clue that might give them an edge. She pored over the readings, searching for patterns or anomalies, But her mind kept drifting back to the orb, the way it had pulsed when she touched it, the way it had felt alive. Guilt gnawed at her constantly, a relentless voice whispering that this was all her fault. She wanted to believe Ethan's neural dampener would help, but deep down, she wondered if anything could truly protect them from what they were about to face. Daniel, too, struggled with his own demons. The visions of his wife and daughter grew stronger, almost tangible. He could hear their voices calling to him, begging him to come closer. Sometimes he swore he could feel their hands brushing against his skin. It was maddening, and he found himself snapping at others more often than usual. Only the discipline drilled into him during years of military training kept him from completely losing control. Even Captain Ryan Carter, usually so composed, felt the strain. He spent long hours alone in his quarters, staring out at the stars. Through the observation window, the vastness of space, once a source of wonder, now seemed suffocating. He thought about the countless lives depending on him to fix this mess, and the pressure threatened to crush him. What if they failed? What if Ethan's plan didn't work? The questions swirled in his mind, unanswerable and haunting. Finally, the day of departure arrived. The Odyssey's edge set course for the black expanse, leaving behind the relative safety of known space. As they entered the region, the ship's systems began to falter. Sensors flickered unpredictably, and navigation became increasingly difficult. Gravitational distortions tugged at the vessel, sending it spinning off course more than once. Through it all, Ethan remained calm, adjusting settings on his dampener and offering guidance whenever necessary. "We're close," he announced. One evening, his voice cutting through the tense silence on the bridge. "I'm picking up fluctuations in the energy readings. This has to be it." Ryan nodded, gripping the armrests of his chair tightly. "Prepare the shuttle," he ordered. "We're going in." The away team assembled quickly, strapping on their neural dampeners and checking their gear. Ethan handed out handheld devices, designed to amplify the dampener's effects, though he warned they wouldn't last forever. "Stay close," he instructed. "Once we're inside, we won't have much time." As the shuttle detached from the Odyssey's edge and approached the Nexus, the crew braced themselves for what lay ahead. Outside the viewport, the construct loomed large, a swirling mass of dark energy and shifting shadows. It pulsed with an unnatural rhythm, as if breathing. Lightning-like tendrils of energy lashed out, striking the shuttle and causing it to shudder violently. "This is insane," Daniel muttered, gripping his weapon tightly. "No kidding," Laura whispered, her knuckles white as she clutched the edge of her seat. Ethan didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the construct, his expression unreadable. Whatever doubts he had, he kept them hidden. All that mattered now was stopping the veil before it consumed them all. The shuttle landed with a jolt, and the team stepped out into the chaos. The air crackled with energy, and the ground beneath their feet felt unstable, as if it might collapse at any moment. Shadows danced around them, twisting and writhing like living things. The whispers returned, louder this time, filling their ears with unintelligible murmurs. Despite the dampeners, the crew could feel the veil's presence pressing down on them, testing their resolve. Laura stumbled, clutching her head as a wave of nausea hit her. Daniel caught her arm, steadying her. "Stay focused," he said firmly, though his own hands trembled slightly. Ethan led the way, moving with deliberate steps toward the center of the construct. Every step felt like walking through quicksand, resistance pulling at them from all sides. The closer they got, the darker it became, until even the dim light from their suits was swallowed whole. And then, they saw it, the source of the veil. A massive entity floated in the distance, its form constantly shifting, made of shadows and glowing eyes. It radiated malice, a living embodiment of fear and despair. "This is it," Ethan said quietly, his voice barely audible over the roaring wind. Now or never, no one spoke. They all knew what was at stake. Failure wasn't an option, not when the fate of the galaxy depended on them. Part 4. The construct was a nightmare made real. Shadows writhed and twisted around the team like living things, their movements erratic and unpredictable. The air crackled with energy, making every breath feel heavy, as though the very atmosphere resisted their presence. The whispers grew louder, overlapping voices speaking in languages no one understood. It wasn't just sound. It was an assault on the mind, clawing at their thoughts and dragging up memories they had long buried. Ethan Cole led the way, his steps steady despite the chaos surrounding them. His neural dampener hummed softly against his chest, its faint pulse a reminder that it was working, but barely. Even with the device shielding him, he could feel the veil's influence pressing down, testing the limits of his resolve. He clenched his jaw, refusing to let fear take hold. This was why he had come to face the darkness head-on and stop it before it consumed everything behind him. Captain Ryan Carter followed closely, his hand resting on the hilt of his sidearm. His eyes darted around, scanning the shifting shadows for any sign of movement. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if the ground itself were resisting their advance. "Stay close," Ryan said, his voice firm but tinged with unease. "We don't know what we're dealing with here." Lieutenant Daniel Hayes brought up the rear, his weapon drawn and ready. He kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting something to leap out of the darkness and attack. His dampener buzzed faintly in response to the psychic interference, a constant reminder of how close they were to losing control. Despite his training, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The glowing eyes from his nightmare seemed to follow him, hovering just beyond the edge of his vision. Dr. Lavra Bennett struggled to keep pace, her legs trembling beneath her. She clutched her handheld dampener tightly, leaning on Daniel for support whenever the nausea hit. Her guilt weighed heavily on her, a relentless voice whispering that she had caused all of this. The orb's pulse still echoed in her mind, a haunting reminder of the moment she had unleashed the nightmare. She wanted to believe Ethan's plan would work, but doubt gnawed at her relentlessly. What if they failed? What if the veil was too strong? As they moved deeper into the construct, the environment grew stranger. Walls seemed to shift and rearrange themselves, closing off paths behind them and forcing the team forward. The glowing symbols etched into the surfaces pulsed erratically, their light flickering like dying stars. At one point, Lavra thought she saw shapes moving in the distance, humanoid figures shrouded in shadow, but when she blinked, they were gone. "This place is alive," Ethan muttered, breaking the tense silence. His voice was low, almost drowned out by the cacophony of whispers. "It's trying to confuse us, to break us apart." Ryan nodded grimly. "Then we stick together. No matter what happens, we don't split up." They pressed on, their progress slow and deliberate. Every step felt like a battle against an invisible force determined to push them back. The veil didn't want them here, that much was clear. It fought them not with physical attacks, but with psychological warfare, feeding on their fears and insecurities. For Daniel, the visions returned stronger than ever. He saw flashes of his wife and daughter, their faces pale and lifeless, reaching out to him with pleading eyes. Their voices called to him, begging him to join them. He shook his head violently, trying to banish the images, but they lingered at the edges of his perception, taunting him. "Not now," he growled under his breath, gripping his weapon tighter. "Not here." Lavra wasn't faring much better. The guilt she carried manifested as phantom hands clutching at her arms, pulling her backward. She stumbled, nearly falling, but Ethan caught her before she hit the ground. "You're okay," he said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Focus, we need you." She nodded, swallowing hard. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she forced herself to keep moving. She couldn't afford to give in, not yet. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached the heart of the construct. The massive entity awaited them, its form towering above them like a living storm. It was composed entirely of shifting shadows, its body constantly reshaping itself into grotesque shapes. Glowing eyes dotted its surface, staring down at them with malevolent intent. Lightning-like tendrils of energy lashed out, striking the ground around them and sending sparks flying. "This is it," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the overwhelming sense of dread in the air. "The nexus of the veil." The entity reacted immediately, its form rippling as it focused on the intruders. A deafening roar filled the chamber, shaking the ground beneath their feet. The whispers turned into screams, a chorus of voices shouting. Accusations and threats. Each word struck like a physical blow, chipping away at their resolve. "You shouldn't have come here." One voice hissed, echoing in their minds. "You are nothing. You will fail." Ethan clenched his fists, ignoring the barrage of insults. He stepped forward, planting himself firmly between the entity and the rest of the team. "Leave them alone," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Your fight is with me." The veil responded with a wave of psychic energy, slamming into Ethan like a freight train. He staggered but remained standing, his dampener glowing brighter as it worked overtime to shield him. "It's trying to overwhelm us," he shouted to the others. "Activate your secondary dampeners." Now, the team fumbled with their devices, activating the handheld units Ethan had given them earlier. The additional shielding helped, dulling the intensity of the veil's assault, but it wasn't enough to completely block it. Lavra fell to her knees, clutching her head as tears streamed down her face. I can't do this," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "Yes, you can," Ethan snapped, turning to look at her, his eyes burned with determination. "You've already done more than anyone else dared to try. Don't give up now." His words struck a chord in Lavra, reigniting a spark of defiance within her. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stand. Her legs wobbled, but she managed to stay upright. "Okay," she whispered, more to herself than to Ethan. "Okay." Ryan and Daniel exchanged a glance, both silently agreeing to protect the others at all costs. They formed a loose circle around Ethan and Lavra, weapons raised and ready to defend against whatever came next. The veil intensified its attack, conjuring illusions tailored to each member of the team. For Ryan, it showed scenes of failure, entire colonies destroyed, because he hadn't acted quickly enough. For Daniel, it brought back the accident that had killed his family, replaying it in excruciating detail. Even Laura's worst fears were laid bare, showing her the destruction she believed she had caused. But Ethan stood firm, unaffected by the illusions. His neural dampener held strong, creating a small pocket of clarity amidst the chaos. He raised his voice, addressing the entity directly. "You feed on fear, but you're afraid too," he said, his tone unwavering. "Afraid of being stopped. Afraid of extinction. That's why you lash out, you're weak." The veil roared again, its form convulsing as if in pain. It lashed out with tendrils of energy, forcing the team to scatter. Ethan barely dodged one, rolling to the side and coming up with a device in his hand. "This is our chance," he yelled. "Get to the core. I'll distract it." "No," Ryan shouted, starting toward him. "We're not leaving you behind. It's the only way." Ethan shot back, his expression fierce. "Trust me." Before anyone could argue further, Ethan activated the device, emitting a burst of energy that drew the veil's attention. The entity recoiled, its glowing eyes fixating on him as it prepared to strike. Taking advantage of the distraction, the rest of the team sprinted toward the core, a pulsating mass of dark energy at the center of the chamber. "We're almost there." Lavra gasped, her voice strained but resolute. "Just a little farther." The veil realized what they were doing and retaliated with renewed fury. Tendrils of energy whipped through the air, narrowly missing the team as they ran. Daniel fired. His weapon, creating a temporary barrier to hold the entity at bay. "Go," he barked, urging the others forward. "I've got this." Reaching the core, Lovra and Ryan began setting up the equipment Ethan had provided. It was a risky plan. Feedback loop designed to overload the Veil's connection to the psychic network, but it was their only hope. As they worked, Ethan continued to draw the entity's attention, shouting taunts and insults to keep it focused on him. "You won't win," he yelled, his voice raw with effort. "I'll tear you apart piece by piece if I have to." The Veil shrieked in rage, its form swelling as it prepared for a final attack. But before it could strike, the feedback loop activated. The core erupted in a blinding flash of light, sending waves of energy rippling outward. The Veil screamed, its body unraveling as the feedback consumed it. Ethan collapsed to his knees, exhausted but alive. The team regrouped around him, their faces pale but triumphant. They had done it, they had silenced the Veil, but the cost weighed heavily on all of them, especially Ethan, who knew his role wasn't finished yet. Part 5. The feedback loop worked, but it wasn't over yet. The Veil screamed a sound so loud and piercing that it felt like the air itself was being torn apart. Its massive form convulsed, shadows twisting and writhing as the energy from the core surged through it. Glowing eyes dimmed one by one, their light flickering out like dying stars. But even as it unraveled, the entity fought back with everything it had left. Ethan Cole knelt on the ground, his body trembling from exhaustion. His neural dampener was still active, protecting him from the worst of the Veil's psychic assault, but he could feel its influence pressing down on him, a suffocating weight threatening to crush his mind. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay focused. "It's not done yet," he muttered under his breath. "We need to hold on." Captain Ryan Carter and Dr. Laura Bennett stood near the core, their hands shaking as they adjusted the controls on the feedback device. The machine hummed loudly, its energy output increasing with each passing second. Sparks flew from exposed wires, and the console glowed red-hot, warning signs flashing across its display. "This thing is going to overload if we don't stabilize it," Lavra shouted, her voice barely audible over the chaos. Ryan wiped sweat from his brow, his fingers flying over the controls. "Keep it together," he yelled back. "We're almost there." Lieutenant Daniel Hayes moved to cover them, firing bursts from his weapon at the tendrils of energy lashing out toward the group. Each shot created a brief gap in the Veil's defenses, giving the others precious seconds to work. But the entity was relentless, its attacks growing more ferocious as it realized what was happening. Shadows coalesced into monstrous shapes, lunging at the team with terrifying speed. Daniel gritted his teeth, refusing to give an inch. "Hurry up," he barked, his voice strained. "I can't keep this up forever." The Veil's voice echoed in their minds, louder and angrier than before. "You cannot destroy me." It roared, its words reverberating through the chamber like thunder. "I am eternal. I am fear itself." Ethan staggered to his feet, his legs unsteady but determined. He grabbed another handheld device from his satchel, a secondary amplifier designed to boost the feedback loop's power. "Not anymore," he said, his voice steady despite the overwhelming pressure. "You're just a parasite, feeding on pain and despair. And parasites die when you cut off their food source." With that, Ethan activated the amplifier, sending a surge of energy into the core. The feedback intensified, waves of light and sound rippling outward in all directions. The Veil shrieked again, its form collapsing inward as the energy consumed. Shadows dissolved into nothingness, and the glowing eyes vanished, leaving only silence behind. For a moment, no one moved. The chamber was eerily quiet, the oppressive weight lifted. The air felt lighter, cleaner, as though a great storm had finally passed. Ethan swayed on his feet, his strength nearly spent. Lovra dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face, not from fear this time, but from relief. Ryan let out a shaky breath, leaning heavily against the console. Even Daniel lowered his weapon, his shoulders sagging as the tension drained from his body. "We did it," Lavra whispered, her voice trembling. "We actually did it." Ryan nodded, though his expression remained grim. "Yeah, we did." "But at what cost?" Ethan didn't respond. He stared at the empty space where the veil had been, his jaw tight. He knew better than anyone that defeating the veil hadn't come without a price. The feedback loop had destabilized the construct, causing cracks to spread across the walls and ceiling. Pieces of debris fell from above, narrowly missing the team as they scrambled to regroup. "We need to get out of here," Ethan said sharply. Now, the urgency in his voice snapped everyone back to reality. They grabbed their gear and started running, retracing their steps through the shifting corridors. The construct groaned around them, its structural integrity failing rapidly. Walls crumbled and floors buckled beneath their feet. At one point, a massive chunk of the ceiling collapsed, blocking their path. Daniel fired his weapon, blasting a hole through the rubble so they could continue. Lavra stumbled, her legs weak from the ordeal, but Ethan caught her before she hit the ground. "Keep moving," he urged, his tone firm but not unkind. "You're stronger than you think." She nodded, drawing strength from his words. Together, they pushed forward, dodging falling debris and navigating the increasingly unstable environment. Finally, they reached the shuttle bay, where the small craft awaited them. The team piled inside, strapping themselves in as Ethan took the controls. "Hold on tight," he warned, powering up the engine stat as the shuttle launched. The construct began to collapse entirely. Massive sections broke apart, swallowed by the void as the nexus imploded. The shuttle rocked violently, buffeted by shockwaves from the destruction. Ethan gripped the controls tightly, steering them clear of the worst of it. Behind them, the construct exploded in a blinding flash of light, sending a shockwave rippling through space. When the turbulence finally subsided, the team sat in stunned silence. Outside the viewport, the black expanse stretched endlessly before them, eerily calm now that the veil was gone. No one spoke for a long time, each lost in their own thoughts. Ethan leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes for a moment. His body ached and his mind felt raw, but he couldn't afford to rest, not yet. There was still work to be done. Turning to the others, he said quietly, "It's over, for now." Ryan looked at him, his expression unreadable. "You saved us," he said after a pause. "All of us. Humanity owes you a debt we can never repay." Ethan shook his head, dismissing the praise. "I didn't do it alone," he replied. "None of us could have stopped the veil without the others. This was a team effort." Lavra wiped her tears away, managing a small smile. "Still, you risked everything. You faced it head-on when the rest of us were ready to give up." "That's what I came here to do," Ethan said simply. "To fight the darkness. To make sure it doesn't win." Daniel nodded, his usual stoicism softened by gratitude. "Whatever happens next, we'll face it together. We've proven we can handle anything." As the shuttle docked with the Odyssey's edge, the crew prepared to return to Earth and share the news of their victory. The galaxy was safe for now, but the scars of the veil would linger for years to come. And Ethan knew that his journey wasn't truly over. There were still questions to answer, mysteries to unravel, and perhaps other threats lurking in the vastness of space. But for now, they had won. Against all odds, humanity had silenced its greatest nightmare, and Ethan Cole had been the one to lead the charge. Part 6. The Odyssey's edge drifted silently through the void, its crew battered but alive. The destruction of the construct had been a victory, but it came at a cost. The ship's systems were strained from the journey through the black expanse, and the final escape from the collapsing nexus. Sparks flew from control panels, and the hum of the engines was uneven, as though the vessel itself was struggling to recover. Yet, the mood aboard the ship was one of cautious relief. For the first time in days, the oppressive weight of the Veil's influence was gone. Ethan Cole sat alone in the engineering bay, surrounded by tools and scattered notes. His hands moved mechanically, repairing damaged circuits and recalibrating equipment. He worked with precision, his mind focused on the task at hand. But beneath his calm exterior, he felt the toll of what they had endured. The neural dampener around his neck still pulsed faintly, a reminder of how close he and everyone else had come to losing themselves to the Veil. He knew the battle wasn't truly over. There would always be new threats lurking in the darkness of space. For now, though, humanity had bought itself some time. Captain Ryan Carter walked into the bay, his boots clanging softly against the metal floor. He stopped a few feet away, watching Ethan work for a moment before speaking. "You've done more than anyone could have asked," he said, his voice low but sincere. "We wouldn't be here without you." Ethan didn't look up. He continued soldering a wire, his movements steady. "I did what I had to do," he replied simply, "nothing more." Ryan sighed, leaning against a nearby console. "That's not true, and you know it. You put yourself in the line of fire when no one else could or would. That takes courage." Ethan finally paused, setting down his tools and turning to face Ryan. His expression was unreadable, his eyes clouded with exhaustion. "Courage doesn't mean much if it costs everything," he said quietly. "And this isn't over. The Veil may be gone, but whatever created it, the ancient consciousness behind it, is still out there, somewhere." Ryan frowned, his brow furrowing. "You think there's more? Another threat like this?" "I don't think it's a fact," Ethan said firmly. "The Veil wasn't just some random artifact. It was part of something bigger, something we don't fully understand yet. Destroying the Nexus was only a temporary solution. If we don't learn from this, if we don't prepare ourselves, we'll face another nightmare like it someday." The gravity of Ethan's words hung heavy in the air. Ryan nodded slowly, realizing the truth in what he was saying. Humanity had narrowly avoided catastrophe, but survival wasn't enough. They needed to adapt, to grow stronger, or risk being wiped out entirely. "What do you suggest?" Ryan asked. Ethan hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "We need to study what happened. Analyze the data we collected from the Construct and the Nexus. Understand how the Veil operated, how it fed on fear and despair. And most importantly, we need to develop better defenses technology that can shield us from psychic attacks like this." Ryan rubbed the back of his neck, considering the implications. "It won't be easy. Earth Command will want answers, and fast. People are scared. They'll demand action." "Then give them action," Ethan said sharply. "But make sure it's the right kind. Rushing into solutions without understanding the problem will only lead to more mistakes." Ryan studied Ethan for a moment, seeing the determination in his eyes. This man had sacrificed so much already, yet he was willing to keep fighting, to keep pushing forward even when others might have given up. "You're not planning to disappear again, are you?" Ryan asked suddenly. "After all this, you owe humanity your expertise." Ethan shook his head, a bitter smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I'm not going anywhere, not yet. But I won't stay tied to Earth Command either. Bureaucracy slows things down, and we don't have time for that. If we're going to face whatever comes next, we need to stay ahead of it." Ryan nodded, understanding where Ethan was coming from. "Fair enough. Just don't go too far. We'll need your help figuring this out." Later that evening, Laura Bennett found Ethan in the observation deck, staring out at the stars. She approached, cautiously, unsure of what to say. "Mind if I join you?" she asked softly. Ethan glanced at her briefly before nodding. "Go ahead." Laura took a seat beside him, folding her hands in her lap. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was comfortable, filled only by the soft hum of the ship's systems. Finally, Lavra broke the quiet. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For everything." Ethan raised an eyebrow, turning to look at her. "You don't have to thank me. You played your part too." "I know," Lavra replied, her gaze dropping to her hands. "But none of this would have happened if I hadn't touched that orb. If I hadn't been so reckless. You couldn't have known," Ethan interrupted, his tone firm. "None of us did. What matters is what you did afterward. You faced your guilt, kept moving forward, and helped stop the Veil. That's what makes a difference." Lavra looked up, meeting his eyes. There was kindness in them, hidden beneath layers of weariness and pain. "Still," she said, forcing a small smile, "I'll try to be more careful next time." Ethan chuckled softly, the sound surprising even himself. "Good idea." They sat in companionable silence for a while longer, watching the stars drift past. Lavra felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in days. Despite everything they had been through, there was hope, a fragile but enduring light in the vastness of space. Back on the bridge, Daniel Hayes stood watch, monitoring the ship's sensors. The journey home would take several days, and the crew needed rest. But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching, waiting. He shook his head, dismissing the thought as paranoia. The Veil was gone. They had won. Yet as he stared at the viewscreen, he couldn't help but wonder, what other nightmares lurked beyond the stars, and would humanity be ready when they came? The galaxy was safe for now, but the scars of the Veil would linger, a reminder of the fragility of life and the resilience of those who fought to protect it. Ethan Cole had silenced the nightmare, but his work was far from finished. Together with the crew of the Odyssey's Edge, he had taken the first step toward a brighter future. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them united, armed with knowledge, courage, and the unyielding belief that even in the darkest night, a single light could banish the shadows. Part 7. The journey back to Earth was long and quiet, the kind of silence that follows a storm. The crew of the Odyssey's Edge moved through their duties with a sense of purpose, but there was an unspoken heaviness in the air. They had survived something unimaginable, yet the weight of what they had endured lingered. Each member of the team carried scars, some visible, others hidden deep within. Captain Ryan Carter spent much of his time on the bridge, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. He thought about the decisions he had made, the risks he had taken, and the lives that had been saved because of them. But he also thought about the sacrifices. Humanity had been pushed to the brink, and while they had emerged victorious, it had come at a cost. Ryan knew the galaxy would never forget what had happened, and neither would he. Dr. Lavra Bennett found solace in her work. She spent hours in the lab, analyzing the data collected from the construct and the Nexus. Her hands trembled as she sifted through the readings, memories of the orb's pulse flashing in her mind. Guilt still clung to her like a shadow, but she forced herself to focus. If they were going to prevent another catastrophe like the Veil, they needed to understand how it had worked and why. Slowly, piece by piece, she began piecing together the puzzle. Lieutenant Daniel Hayes kept to himself, patrolling the ships, corridors, or standing watch on the bridge. His weapon was always close at hand, a reminder of the dangers they had faced and the ones that might still lie ahead. The visions of his wife and daughter had faded, but the ache in his chest remained. He tried not to dwell on it, instead channeling his energy into protecting the crew. If there was one thing he had learned during their mission, it was that fear could be conquered not by running from it, but by facing it head-on. Ethan Cole, meanwhile, worked tirelessly in the engineering bay. He tinkered with the neural dampeners, improving their design and testing new modifications. His movements were precise, almost mechanical, as though he were trying to outrun his own thoughts. But no matter how busy he kept himself, the memories of the Nexus haunted him. The Veil's voice still echoed faintly in his mind, its words taunting him even now. "You cannot destroy me," it had said. And maybe it was right. Maybe destroying the Veil hadn't been enough. As the days passed, the crew began to heal. In their own ways. Conversations grew easier, laughter returned, and the oppressive atmosphere aboard the ship slowly lifted. They shared stories of their lives before the mission, simple moments that reminded them of who they were outside of the chaos they had faced. For the first time in what felt like forever, they allowed themselves to hope. When the Odyssey's edge finally reached Earth, the welcome was overwhelming. News of their victory had spread across the galaxy, sparking celebrations on countless worlds. The crew stepped off the ship to find crowds gathered, cheering and waving banners. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and dignitaries offered handshakes and praise. It was surreal, almost too much to process, but Ethan stayed apart from the festivities. He stood at the edge of the crowd, watching silently as the others basked in the spotlight. His role in stopping the Veil had earned him fame, but he didn't want it. Fame meant attention, and attention meant scrutiny, things he had spent years avoiding. Still, he couldn't deny the importance of what they had accomplished. Humanity had faced its greatest nightmare and emerged stronger for it. Captain Ryan Carter addressed the crowd, his voice steady and confident. "Today, we celebrate not just a victory, but the resilience of our species," he said, his words met with cheers. "We faced an enemy unlike any we've ever known, and together we defeated it. This is a testament to the strength of humanity, to our courage, our determination, and our unity." The speech went on, but Ethan tuned it out. Retreating to a quiet corner of the spaceport, he wasn't interested in speeches or accolades. What mattered to him was the future, the lessons humanity would take from this experience, and the steps they would take to prepare for whatever came next. Lavra joined him eventually, holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to him with a small smile. "Thought you might need this," she said. Ethan accepted the cup, nodding in thanks. "You're probably right." They sat together in silence for a while, sipping their drinks and watching the celebration from a distance. Finally, Lovra spoke. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. Ethan shrugged, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Now? We rebuild, we learn, we make sure this doesn't happen again." "That's a big task," Lovra said, raising an eyebrow. "Do you really think we can do it?" "We have to," Ethan replied firmly. "If we don't, then everything we went through, all the sacrifices, all the pain, will have been for nothing." Lavra nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "And you'll help us?" "As much as I can," Ethan said. "But I'm not staying here. Too many people, too many expectations. I work better alone." Lavra frowned, disappointment flickering across her face. "You're leaving?" "Not forever," Ethan assured her. "But I need space to think, to plan. There's still so much we don't know about the Veil and about whatever created it. I can't do that sitting in a lab on Earth." Lavra hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "I get it. Just promise me you won't disappear completely." Ethan smiled faintly, a rare moment of warmth breaking through his usual stoicism. "I promise." In the weeks that followed, life began to return to normal, or as close to normal as it could after such an event. Scientists pored over the data collected during the mission, searching for clues about the Veil's origins and the ancient consciousness behind it. Engineers worked to improve the neural dampeners, creating prototypes capable of shielding entire colonies. Governments collaborated on new defense systems, determined to ensure humanity would never be caught off guard again. For the crew of the Odyssey's Edge, the aftermath was bittersweet. They had saved the galaxy, but the cost of that victory weighed heavily on them. Captain Ryan Carter threw himself into his duties, vowing to lead with wisdom and compassion. Lieutenant Daniel Hayes found peace in his role as protector, dedicating himself to training others to face the unknown. Dr. Lavra Bennett poured her energy into research, driven by a desire to understand and prevent future threats. And Ethan Cole? He disappeared into the stars, taking with him the knowledge and resolve to continue the fight. His name became legend, whispered with reverence and gratitude. Memorials were erected in his honor, though he never saw them. To Ethan, the real tribute was the survival of humanity, their ability to rise above fear and face the darkness with courage. The galaxy moved forward, scarred but resilient. The veil had tested them in ways they could never have imagined. But it had also shown them their strength. Together, they had silenced a nightmare. And together, they would face whatever came next. 8 years passed, and the galaxy slowly healed from the wounds inflicted by the veil. Life returned to a semblance of normalcy, though the scars remained etched into the memories of those who had lived through the nightmare. Colonies rebuilt their shattered communities, scientists continued their research, and humanity pressed onward, determined to learn from its mistakes. The veil had been a wake-up call, a reminder of how fragile existence truly was, and how strong humanity could be when united. On Earth, a memorial was erected near the orbital ring, a place where travelers could pause and reflect on the events that had changed everything. It was simple but powerful, a polished stone pillar surrounded by plaques bearing the names of those who had perished during the Veil's reign of terror. At its base stood a small plaque dedicated to Ethan Cole, the man who had led the charge against the darkness. Engraved on it were his words, spoken during the mission. Even in the darkest night, a single light can banish the shadows. Visitors came from all corners of the galaxy to pay their respects. Some left flowers or tokens of gratitude. Others simply stood in silence, gazing at the plaque with tears in their eyes. Among them was Dr. Laura Bennett, now one of the leading experts on psychic phenomena. She visited often, her mind filled with memories of the mission and the man who had inspired her to keep going when all hope seemed lost. Each time she came, she whispered a quiet thank you to Ethan, knowing he would never hear it, but hoping, somehow, that he might. The lessons of the Veil shaped humanity's future. In profound ways, new technologies emerged, born from the innovations created during the crisis. Neural dampeners became standard equipment for deep space missions, protecting explorers from potential psychic threats. Colonies developed early warning systems to detect anomalies like the ones that had signaled the Veil's presence. Humanity's reach expanded further than ever before, not out of recklessness, but with caution and preparation. Captain Ryan Carter retired from active duty after several more years of service, passing the mantle to a new generation of leaders. His legacy was one of courage and wisdom, a guiding light for those who followed in his footsteps. Lieutenant Daniel Hayes, too, found peace in his later years, mentoring young officers and sharing stories of the mission that had changed his life. Though he still carried the loss of his family, he had learned to honor their memory by protecting others. As for Ethan Cole, his whereabouts remained unknown. Rumors circulated about sightings on distant outposts or aboard isolated ships. No one could confirm them. Some believed he had moved on to other galaxies, seeking answers to questions only he understood. Others thought he had simply vanished, retreating into the vastness of space to escape the burdens of fame and responsibility. Whatever the truth, Ethan's influence endured. His work inspired countless engineers and scientists, and his story became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one person could make a difference. One evening, years after the mission, Lavra stood alone at the memorial, staring up at the stars. The sky was clear, dotted with pinpricks of light that stretched endlessly into the void. She felt a sense of awe mixed with sadness, a bittersweet acknowledgement of how much they had gained and lost. As she turned to leave, something caught her eye, a figure standing nearby, watching her silently. It was Ethan. He looked older, His hair streaked with gray, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lavra broke the silence. "I wasn't sure I'd ever see you again," she said softly. Ethan smiled faintly, his expression unreadable. "I told you I wouldn't disappear completely." Lavra stepped closer, studying him carefully. "What are you doing here?" "I heard about the memorial," Ethan replied. "Thought it was time to see it for myself." They stood together, in silence, gazing at the plaques and the pillar. Finally, Lavra asked the question that had weighed on her mind for years. "Are you staying this time, or are you leaving again?" Ethan hesitated, his gaze fixed on the stars. "I don't know," he admitted. "There's still so much to do, so many questions to answer, but maybe I'll stick around for a while." Lavra nodded, relief washing over her. "Good, we could use your help." Ethan chuckled softly, the sound almost foreign to his own ears. "You've done fine without me," he said. "But if you need me, I'll be here." In the months that followed, Ethan began working with Lara and other scientists to develop new technologies and strategies for dealing with potential threats. He shared his knowledge freely, offering insights that only someone who had faced the veil firsthand could provide. Slowly, he became part of the team, not as a leader, but as a guide, a voice of reason in a world still learning to navigate the unknown. Humanity continued to explore the stars, driven by curiosity and a desire to understand the universe. They encountered new challenges, new mysteries, and new wonders. But they also carried with them the lessons of the veil, the importance of unity, resilience, and courage. And whenever fear threatened to take hold, they remembered Ethan's words. Even in the darkest night, a single light can banish the shadows. The galaxy was vast and unpredictable, full of dangers both seen and unseen. But humanity had proven itself capable of facing them head-on. Together, they had silenced a nightmare. And together, they would continue to shine their light into the darkness, ensuring that the stars remained a place of hope for everyone.